Kaylin Thompson had her boarding pass, she had her ID, and she had her seat in first class. But none of that mattered. A flight attendant glanced at her wheelchair, then at her nurse, and without warning, everything changed. Gate staff surrounded her. A quiet murmur turned into cold instructions. You're not approved to board. You'll need to step aside. Step aside? She couldn't even walk. Kaylin's face was calm. Confused, but calm. Her father had told her once, never let them see you fold. So she didn't. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't resist. She didn't cry until they took her off the plane. Passengers stared. Some shook their heads. A few pulled out their phones. And one video, just 23 seconds long, would reach her father before she even left the airport. He was sitting in a high-rise office with 12 men in suits, seconds away from signing a $999 billion global aviation deal. He watched it. Then he stood up. No speech, no drama. He just said one sentence. And what he did next? It wiped $1 trillion off the table before the airline could even issue a press release. You're watching Echoes of Hope Stories HQ. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss what really matters. And hey, drop your country in the comments. I give shout-outs in upcoming episodes, and I'd love to recognize where our powerful stories are reaching. But most importantly, like this video and make sure you watch this until the very end. Because what happens next? It's bigger than a flight, bigger than a merger. This story is just getting started. Kaylin Thompson was 14 years old, born with cerebral palsy, born black, and born into a world that never stopped testing her. She used a wheelchair, but if you talked to her for even 2 minutes, you'd forget that completely. Her mind, sharp, her humor, unmatched. Science was her playground, robotics, aerospace, clean energy. She once said she wanted to redesign airplane seats so nobody gets left behind because of wheels. She was that girl, the one who asked hard questions in class, then stayed after to tutor someone who didn't get it. Teachers called her a genius. Her classmates called her the future. But to one man, she was simply his world. Her father, Darius Thompson, was 48, billionaire, self-made, son of a Detroit bus mechanic and a Sunday school teacher. The kind of man who didn't just talk about equity, he engineered it. Darius built Thompson Futures, a tech and infrastructure company worth billions. But what set it apart? He only worked with global partners that signed a human access pledge, guaranteeing racial, gender, and disability inclusion at every touchpoint. He didn't just want to build better airports. He wanted to build fairer skies. And Kaylin was in every blueprint. She wasn't just his daughter. She was the spark behind the empire. Every runway design, every contract clause about accessibility, that was her voice in his ear. They were inseparable. Not in a daddy's little girl kind of way. More like co-founders in a mission to prove that mobility, ability, and brilliance don't come in just one form or one color. Their trip to Zurich was no vacation. Kaylin had been invited to speak at a global expo on inclusive design in aviation. At 14, the youngest speaker on the roster. Her presentation, titled "Access is Not a Favor," was scheduled right before her father's keynote on climate-smart terminals. The moment was supposed to be historic, but they didn't make it to Zurich because someone decided that a black child in a wheelchair didn't look like she belonged in first class. And that decision would cost more than just her seat. It would rewrite the trajectory of a $999 billion deal and expose just how easily racism and ableism still show up, quietly, openly, globally. The boarding process began like any other. Kaylin sat quietly near the gate, waiting to pre-board. Her nurse, Miss Reynolds, had already confirmed everything with the staff: wheelchair assistance, seating arrangement, medical note. It was all cleared, except it wasn't. As Kaylin was wheeled forward, the gate agent, mid-30s, white, clipboard in hand, looked her up and down, then looked at her nurse, then back at Kaylin. Is she able to sit upright without assistance? Does she speak? Are you sure she understands instructions in an emergency? Each question landed like an accusation. Miss Reynolds responded calmly. Yes, Kaylin could sit upright. Yes, she could speak. Yes, she could follow instructions. She just needed physical assistance, not mental. But that didn't seem to matter. The agent disappeared into the jetway. Minutes passed. When they were finally allowed to board, Kaylin rolled past business class. As she reached the first row of first class, one of the flight attendants leaned toward another and said under her breath, "She shouldn't be up here." Kaylin heard it. So did the passenger across the aisle, who looked up in disbelief. But no one said anything. The nurse helped Kaylin into her seat. She clipped in, she smiled, she reached for the seatbelt herself. And then, just as the plane's main cabin door was about to close, two uniformed airline employees stepped on board. They didn't make eye contact. They didn't ask for Kaylin's name. They just said they were removing her for non-compliance with airline safety protocol. Her nurse tried to interject, explaining that no policy had been broken. Kaylin's chair had been stowed. She was seated, belted in, calm, but it didn't matter. They repeated it again, non-compliance. Kaylin asked softly, "What did I do wrong?" No one answered her. A few passengers began filming. One older white man in 2A stood up and asked, "Why are you taking her off?" She didn't do anything. Still, no explanation, just firm hands and short instructions. Kaylin was escorted off the aircraft in full view of a silent cabin, her face flushed, eyes red. The tears came only after she hit the jet bridge. Outside the gate, her nurse pleaded with airline staff for clarity. One agent claimed it was about seat configuration and emergency clearance. Another said she posed a risk to other passengers in an evacuation. But none of them could point to a single rule that had been broken. Then came the final insult. They didn't rebook her. They didn't offer a hotel voucher. They didn't call a supervisor. They just handed her a pamphlet and said she could file a formal complaint online. The nurse asked to speak with someone from management. She was told no one was available. Kaylin sat in her wheelchair at the side of the terminal, head low, trying not to sob while travelers passed without a glance. She had waited months to give that speech. She had designed her own slides, practiced for hours, dreamed of standing in front of a crowd and saying, "Access is not a favor." And now, she wouldn't even leave the ground. Meanwhile, Flight 308 departed for Zurich without her. First class was -1 seat. The empty space where Kaylin should have been remained quiet, except for the man in 2A, who kept asking aloud, "How do you kick off a child for sitting down?" She was treated like a threat, not a child, not a human being, not the keynote speaker, not the engineer in the making, not the daughter of the man whose signature was waiting on a $999 billion deal that same morning. Just another black passenger with a problem. The airport security didn't blink, the airline staff didn't apologize, and the flight crew, they moved on like nothing had happened. But that 23-second video captured everything. Kaylin's face, stunned, her voice shaking, her nurse pleading, and a cabin full of people watching it all go down, quietly. That clip would make its way across the country in minutes. It would make its way to Darius Thompson in even less. It started with a phone video. Just 23 seconds long. You couldn't hear much over the engine noise and the flight announcements. But you could see her, Kaylin, holding the armrest with one hand, tears forming in her eyes as two uniformed staff escorted her down the aisle. Her nurse saying, "She's not a threat." And the man in 2A shouting, "This is wrong." By the time the plane touched down in Zurich, the video had already hit 500,000 views. Within 2 hours, the hashtag #LetHerFly was trending globally. Comment sections lit up. "She's a child. What did she do? Disabled, black, first class, that's all they saw." This is exactly why accessibility isn't optional. The internet didn't know her name yet, but someone did. Miles away, in a boardroom high above Manhattan, Darius Thompson sat with 12 executives. Leather chairs, steel carafes, a view of the skyline that cost more than some cities. The room was silent as they reviewed the final slide in a billion-dollar presentation. A voice interrupted. Darius's assistant, knocking once, stepping in quietly, holding out a phone. No words, just the screen. He tapped it, pressed play. He watched the video. Expression unreadable. Watched again, slower. No one in that room spoke. One man leaned forward to say something, then thought better of it. Darius calmly closed his laptop, stood up and said, "This meeting is over," and walked out. No shouting, no threats, no long statements, just 4 words that would echo across the business world within the hour. What the airline didn't know, what the press hadn't yet uncovered, was that the girl they removed wasn't just anybody. She was the only daughter of the man finalizing a $999 billion merger with AeroCore, the global infrastructure firm that owned the airline. Darius hadn't gone public. Not yet. But the media was already working faster than PR departments could react. Within hours, tech journalists connected the dots. Photos of Kaylin at award ceremonies beside her father were published. Old interviews resurfaced. One where Darius said, "My daughter teaches me more about justice than any boardroom ever will." The internet exploded. Financial reporters asked, "Is AeroCore about to lose the biggest deal in its history because of a wheelchair discrimination case?" AeroCore's press team rushed out a response. A polished, sterile paragraph blaming the incident on protocol confusion involving seating procedures. No apology. No names. No accountability. They thought a paragraph would make it disappear. They thought they were dealing with someone anonymous, someone forgettable. They thought she was powerless. They had no idea who was watching. Darius never made a public statement. Not that day. But he didn't have to. The silence said enough. He canceled all remaining meetings that week, declined press interviews, and while Kaylin sat at home, still in her wheelchair, still in disbelief, her father began quietly taking phone calls from global leaders, investment heads, and journalists asking the same question. "Are you really walking away from this deal?" But Darius never talked business in the middle of a storm. Not when his daughter had been humiliated in front of a plane full of strangers for simply existing. The story kept growing. Celebrities reposted the clip. Disability advocates organized a digital protest. Civil rights attorneys began digging into the airline's past. And beneath all the hashtags, there was one glaring truth no press release could cover. This wasn't a one-off mistake. This was how power looks at Black disability and looks away. A day before the incident, Darius Thompson was on the verge of closing the largest infrastructure deal of the decade. His company, Thompson Futures, had spent 19 months building a merger with AeroCore, the global logistics and transport giant that owned several international airports, and the airline that removed Kaylin from her seat. The final documents had already been circulated. The closing meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. the next day. Everything was in place, until it wasn't. The moment Darius saw that video of Kaylin being removed, quiet, confused, doing absolutely nothing wrong, he didn't rage, he didn't curse, he didn't even speak. He simply walked out of that boardroom. For the next few hours, his phone rang nonstop. Executives, partners, lawyers, everyone scrambling for answers. He didn't answer a single one. Instead, he drafted 5 lines. No conference call, no delay, no public negotiation. To AeroCore Legal and Executive Office, "I do not conduct business with companies that dehumanize children. This deal is over. We're done, D. Thompson." That email hit inboxes at 6:42 a.m. Eastern Time. By 7:10 a.m., every major financial newsroom had received a tip from a verified source. The Thompson AeroCore deal has collapsed. By 8 a.m., the New York Stock Exchange opened. By 8:07, AeroCore stock had dropped 6%. By 9, it was down 17%. And by noon, the company had lost $58 billion in market cap. All because they let one girl's dignity be optional. This wasn't some PR stunt. Darius wasn't looking for headlines. He didn't call a press conference. He didn't sit down with a network news anchor. He let the silence speak. And that silence thundered through every glass tower on Wall Street. Inside AeroCore headquarters, panic set in. Meeting rooms overflowed. Phones rang off the hook. Department heads were called in early. Nobody had a plan. An emergency memo leaked just hours later. Subject line: urgent. Deal collapse. Immediate containment strategy. One executive wrote, "We didn't know it was his kid. No one flagged this. Someone dropped the ball." But it wasn't a ball. It was a child. A Black child. And they treated her like baggage. A senior board member, off record, told a journalist, "If this had been a white teenager in a wheelchair, there's no chance in hell she'd have been removed from that plane." Another internal message was leaked by a whistleblower. "The optics are unmanageable. His daughter's story has the internet by the throat." They kept saying, "We didn't know it was his daughter." But that was never the real problem. The problem was that it had to be his daughter for them to care. And that's where they missed the point. While AeroCore scrambled, Darius sat quietly in his home office. He wasn't watching market updates. He wasn't reading articles. He was sitting next to Kaylin, reviewing her expo slides, helping her rehearse, even though the stage would stay empty. Her first slide had just one sentence on it: Access is not a favor. She never got to say it on stage. But that line was being shared across social media, printed in protest posters, quoted in international newspapers, because sometimes one quiet truth does more damage than 1,000 press releases. That's what made Darius different. He didn't throw money at silence, he didn't file lawsuits or threaten brand destruction. He just refused to let his power validate people who invalidated his daughter. And that refusal hit harder than any courtroom verdict. Financial analysts tried to explain the fallout. Was this a market overreaction? Can AeroCore recover in Q3? But none of them understood what had really happened. This wasn't about projections, this was about principle. And on that day, principle was worth more than $999 billion. Corporate think tanks issued statements. One said, "This is a wake-up call for executive leadership worldwide. Dismissing DEI isn't just a moral failure. It's now a financial liability." Aviation groups scrambled to revise accessibility protocols. Airlines quietly updated their disability training modules overnight. Investors demanded oversight reports from partner companies. But it was already too late. The world had seen it. The world remembered it. And Darius Thompson didn't need to say another word. They thought walking away from a trillion-dollar deal was impossible. They forgot that for some people, especially people who've had to fight for everything, walking away is the first thing they learn how to do. Darius didn't need their money. He needed them to understand something they'd ignored for generations. Not because of who her father was, not because she trended on social media, but because she was human. And being black, disabled, and dignified shouldn't require an explanation, or a net worth, or a threat of loss. It should just be enough. What if Kaylin hadn't been Darius Thompson's daughter? What if she didn't come from wealth? What if she hadn't been preparing to speak at an international expo? What if the video never went viral? Would anyone have cared? That's the part no boardroom can fix. The part no press release can erase. Because Kaylin's story, yes, it was shocking, but it wasn't rare. Let's look at the facts. According to the FAA, complaints from disabled passengers have doubled in just the last 5 years. Wheelchairs are routinely damaged, medical instructions are dismissed, and staff training? Often outdated or non-existent. But it gets worse when you add race to the equation. A 2023 Civil Rights Review of U.S. air travel found that black disabled passengers are 4 times more likely to be flagged for safety-related concerns compared to white disabled passengers. The same conditions, the same chairs, the same boarding process, but not the same treatment. And when it comes to accountability, only 1% of airline executives in the U.S. identify as black. Less than that are disabled, which means the people making decisions about who is safe to fly often don't look like or live like the people most affected. So when Kaylin was removed from that flight, it wasn't just a moment, it was a pattern showing up. Again, we spoke with a disability rights attorney who's worked on over 70 airline discrimination cases. She asked not to be named, but her words hit hard. If she were white, in a motorized chair, wearing a Stanford hoodie, she wouldn't have been touched. The moment they saw a young black girl in a basic wheelchair and a nurse who didn't look corporate, they made a decision. One they'll never admit, but made just the same. She went on to say that most of her clients don't go viral. They don't have billionaire fathers. They don't get a second chance. They just sit quietly in terminals, crying into folded pamphlets that say, "File a complaint online." This isn't just about airlines. It's about how power treats visibility. Kaylin was doing everything right. She had documentation, she followed every rule, she had someone with her. But when you're black and visibly disabled, the burden is always heavier. You don't just have to comply, you have to prove you're not a problem. They said she was a safety concern. But the truth is, what they saw was something else. They saw someone who didn't fit their mold of who belongs in first class, and they decided she didn't belong at all. And what does that say to every young black girl watching? Every disabled child who dreams of seeing the world? Every father who teaches his daughter that if she works hard enough, she'll be treated fairly? It says, even when you follow all the rules, they might still move the goalposts. Because it's not about how prepared you are. It's about whether they've already decided you're not welcome. Kaylin's story pulled back the curtain. But it didn't create the stage. That stage has been there. In every ignored complaint, every forced removal, every incident that didn't go viral because the person at the center didn't have the right name or enough money to matter. That's the real danger of racism and ableism when they operate together. They don't need to shout, they just quietly erase people. And the people erased, they almost always look like Keelan. Keelan didn't make it to Zurich. Her seat on that stage stayed empty. The microphone she had rehearsed with was never touched. But her words, they still reached the world. The conference organizers, horrified by what had happened, offered her a remote platform on the final day of the expo, not as a guest, as the closing voice. The screen went dark, then lit up with a video feed. There she was, Keelan, sitting in her chair. Calm, focused, dignified. She didn't wear anything flashy, just a charcoal blazer, a soft gray head wrap, and a pin that read, "Access is not a favor." She looked directly into the camera and said, "To every kid who's ever been told you don't belong here, don't believe them. They'll say you're too different, too difficult, too risky, but that's because they can't see your value unless you make them uncomfortable. Make them uncomfortable anyway." The audience stood up before she even finished. It wasn't sympathy. It was respect. Back home, Keelan didn't disappear from the spotlight, but she didn't chase it either. What she and her father did instead was build something that would outlast hashtags and headlines. They called it Lift Together, a design and engineering startup focused on transforming airports into fully inclusive environments. But it wasn't just ramps and elevators. It was rethinking everything, from boarding zones and aircraft interiors to staff training and traveler rights policies. Lift Together's mission was simple. No one gets grounded because of how they move, look, or live. And it took off. Within 6 months, Lift Together signed its first 3 international contracts. Within a year, they were consulting on infrastructure for 5 major airports across North America and Africa. They weren't waiting for the industry to apologize. They were building something that made those apologies unnecessary. Then came the offer. The airline that had removed Keelan, under pressure from shareholders, facing tanking public sentiment, reached out privately through their legal team. They offered a settlement, $100 million. The terms, non-disclosure, no public statement, and a binding agreement to never mention the incident again. Keelan read it, then handed it back. "We're not here to sell silence," she said. "We're here to redesign the sky." That decision caught fire. Media outlets praised her poise, civil rights leaders applauded her integrity, corporate ethics forums called it the most powerful rejection of hush money in modern business history. But what mattered most? The kids who saw her, who felt seen by her. Letters poured in, emails, handwritten notes. "I'm in a chair too, thank you for making me proud to be visible. My son has autism, you gave me courage to fly again. You didn't take their money, you gave us something priceless instead." And then one morning, it happened. Time magazine released its annual cover for Young Leaders of the Year. Right in the center, Darius Thompson. Headline, "The girl who grounded injustice and took off anyway." The photo wasn't staged. It was her in a hangar, surrounded by airport workers, engineers, and accessibility advocates, all wearing shirts that read, "Lift Together." She turned humiliation into innovation, and silence into impact. What they tried to break in an airport aisle, she rebuilt into a runway. Not with vengeance, not with vanity, but with vision. Because when systems fail you in public, the loudest response is not anger, it's transformation. And Keelan, she didn't just transform an airline, she transformed what justice looks like when it wears wheels, speaks softly, and refuses to disappear. After Keelan's story went public, the world didn't just react, it responded. Thousands of messages came pouring in, comments, DMs, emails, letters, from parents, from travelers, from people who had never felt seen in a story before. Some of those messages stay with me. As a disabled Black vet, Keelan's story made me cry. I've been told I'm a threat too, for needing help. Thank you for giving this a voice. I showed this to my daughter. She cried and said, "She's me." I've never seen her feel proud to be in her wheelchair, until now. I work at a regional airline. After watching this, I realized we failed a lot of people, and I'm going to start speaking up. They came from every corner of the world. Ghana, Atlanta, South Africa, Birmingham, Brazil, Malaysia. Viewers who saw themselves in Keelan, or who realized for the first time just how invisible someone like her can be. Not invisible because she isn't brilliant or brave, but invisible because racism and ableism are experts at erasing the very people who prove them wrong. And so, I want to ask you, how many stories like this never go viral? How many Kaylins are quietly walked off planes, out of schools, denied entry into rooms they earned the right to be in, without a single camera rolling? What happens when there's no footage, no hashtags, no billionaire father to collapse a deal? What happens when it's just a nurse, a crying child, and a staff member with too much power and too little accountability? And what about the people around them? The ones in seats 3C and 4D? The gate agent's manager? The travelers watching with phones in their pockets? What would you have done on that plane? Would you have spoken up? Would you have recorded? Would you have walked off in protest? Or would you have looked away and told yourself it wasn't your place? The truth is, stories like Keelan's aren't just about injustice. They're about responsibility. They remind us that silence is never neutral, that a system doesn't need a villain to be violent. It just needs good people to say nothing when it counts. So if you felt something watching this story, if you cried, if you got angry, if it made you think of someone you love, then don't just scroll. Don't just click away. Tell us where you're watching from in the comments. Tell us if this has ever happened to you. Tell us what you would have done on that plane. Because your voice, it matters more than views. It turns a story into a movement. And Kaylyn's story isn't over, it's just the beginning. Kaylyn Thompson never asked to be a symbol. She wasn't looking for fame, she wasn't chasing headlines. She was just trying to get to Zurich, to share her vision, to speak her truth, to take her place, in a world that too often acts like there isn't one for girls who look like her. But when they kicked her down, she stood taller than the whole airline. And in that moment, Kaylyn became something they didn't expect. A reminder that even when power shows its ugliest face, dignity doesn't fold, it rises. She didn't retaliate with rage, she responded with resolve. She didn't shrink, she built. She didn't beg for a seat, she reimagined the runway. Kaylyn didn't ask to carry the weight of a broken system on her shoulders, but when the time came, she didn't drop it. She turned that weight into fuel, into innovation, into legacy. So let this be a reminder. We live in a world where it's still possible for a young black girl in a wheelchair to be seen as a problem, simply for existing in a space that was never built for her. But we also live in a world where that same girl can stand her ground, move global markets, and redefine what access means. Not just for herself, but for everyone who's ever been told they don't belong. The true measure of any society can be found in how it treats its most vulnerable. Mahatma Gandhi. Thank you for watching Echoes of Horus to HQ. If this story moved you, challenged you, or made you think about the world a little differently, don't let it stop here. Like this video and share it for more people to see. Subscribe for more real stories that expose injustice and uplift truth. Drop a comment. Where are you watching from? And what part of Kaylyn's journey hit you the hardest? And stay tuned for our next story, because the world is watching, and so are we. Until next time, stay loud, stay kind, and never forget that silence is a choice. Let's keep echoing hope together.